In the game that was the Dan Mullen Bowl, let's just say we all walk away winners. Florida gets the 45-28 victory, and there's plenty to discuss. What's going on, SEC Unfiltered? It's Cole Thompson here on the postgame show presented by Prize Picks. Real quickly, thank you for joining us. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below because we're talking all things SEC moving forward. And this is your number one source for all things SEC football moving into the next half of the regular season. Make sure that also you download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Make sure that you follow me on Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. That way the back and forth banter can never stop. And to check out all of our great work, make sure that you visit secunfiltered.com. The post-game show presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code SECU at sign up to get an instant $50 play with your first $5 lineup. Make sure that you're betting on everything that you want for your Gators, your Bulldogs, whoever you root for, with the Prize Picks promo code SECU, $50 off. 45-28 final score down at Davis-Wade Stadium in Starkville. And I'm just going to call a spade a spade. I predicted this exactly the way it happened. So this is why you should be following me on the social channels, because I said that this game was going to get drunk. And boy, oh boy, did it take a little while for the pregame to pick on up. But ultimately, we watched as this game got out of control. More shots given out than in the Lil Jon song. And naturally, everybody who watched this down in Starkville, everybody in Gainesville, definitely needs to go ahead and take a quick hangover nap. Really good overall performance if you're talking about this from Billy Napier's squad. And let's just go ahead and call it as is. People are going to wonder going into this week what was going to be the status of Billy moving forward. A downtrodden loss last weekend against Texas A&M. No life whatsoever. Fans inside of the swamp were booing Billy on the Megatron for a don't drink and drive commercial. And this is where you start to wonder, well, what happens going into the bye week? There is more history surrounding these two schools than simply just Scott Strickland and Dan Mullen. For those of you that can remember, Ron Zook fired in 2004 following a loss to the Bulldogs in Starkville. So naturally the question was, going into a bye week, do you go ahead and fire Billy? Is this the move where you finally go ahead and say, we can't fix this? Timing is inevitable. We got to go ahead and pull the plug. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think at this point, you're dissolving and delaying the inevitable, but that does not mean that Billy is going to be gone out of a job. Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway, one thing that you got to go ahead and say, pretty good quarterback play. Overall, 2 misfires on the day. DJ Lagway did have the fumble in the end zone, but combined 26-28, 277 yards, 3 touchdowns. The rotating quarterback position did work. And ultimately, it's going to continue to work, I think, moving into next week when you have to go ahead and get into the bye. This is a big deal. Carrying momentum into the bye week is going to be critical for Florida, as now they get to take on UCF back in the swamp. And Billy said some things going into the week that I thought were really important. For starters, getting away from Gainesville is a good thing. I don't think it was anything to do with the fact that the fan base is ready to light the torches and pick up the pitchforks and go ahead and roast him at the stake. But I do believe that getting on the road was an ultimate good test because of there are going to be tougher matchups moving in the path. But we did hit the over. So for those of you that followed me on Twitter and those of you that follow me on Instagram at Mr. Cole Thompson, shameless plug, congratulations. You won a little bit of money. You got a little bit richer today because this game went back and forth. Let's just go through after the 2-minute warning how these drives went. Touchdown, touchdown, end of half, punt, touchdown, touchdown, fumble inside the red zone, touchdown, touchdown, field goal, end of game. Ultimately, you knew what this game was. It was a back and forth mess of chaos, and certainly a lot of questions that you want to answer if you're Florida, but there are some positives that you can take away. Let's start off with not only Graham Mertz kind of showing that now fully healthy, he is the guy. I've talked about this all offseason. When you talk about a guy like Graham Mertz, quarterback play is essential. And you're not going to say that he is the best quarterback in the SEC. You would be far remiss to go ahead and call him that. But what I will say is, you did believe that this was the quarterback that was basically the Raising Cane's of college football. Now, what exactly does that mean? There are definitely better ingredients out there, better fast food joints, but you're not going to complain if you and the rest of the troops stop on a road trip and pick up Raising Cane's. It's good enough to get by. He showed you that today. 19-21, 201 passing yards, 4 total touchdowns, including a run on the ground inside the red zone. Big 16-yard pickup as well. Let's also talk about DJ Lagway. Lagway is going to have to be a factor in this game moving forward simply because You got to go ahead and see what the future entails. The last thing you want to do if you are Florida is see Billy Napier be fired. Ultimately, DJ Lagway doesn't go ahead and stick around with the program, and you're starting from fresh. This is the most important recruit that has come through Gainesville since Tim Tebow. Speaking of Tim Tebow, remember back in 2007 when this was a kind of quarterback, not conundrum per se, but it was certainly a quarterback carousel. Guy by the name of Chris Leak started the game, but then you had plays designed for Tim Tebow. Well, Chris Leak, go meet Graham Mertz. Graham Mertz, go meet Chris Leak. Tim Tebow, go meet DJ Lagway. There is an importance to that. But moving forward, I think the quarterback carousel thing could work if they do it the way they did today. Billy said in the very beginning of the game he was going to mix in quarterbacks by going every other drive. Strike that, reverse it. Every 2 drives, Graham Mertz would start, and then you would see DJ Lagway. Ultimately, Lagway came in, and the offense really didn't miss a beat. Now, with that being said, there certainly are some questions overall. Let's talk about that first half real fast. So people are wondering, how was this a really interesting game? Well, for starters, Florida was on a 7-game losing streak against P4 opponents going into this matchup. Absolutely dreadful performance against Miami, horrendous performance against Texas A&M, where the backup quarterback came in and seemed to fit like a glove in Colin Klein's system, but also they had struggled all year. When they got the first touchdown pass from Graham Mertz to Arlius Bodiham, that was the first time they have led all year against a P4 program. So naturally, this is where you're starting to gain the momentum. This was actually pretty close when you look at the numbers, and this is why sometimes stats lie. Go back and see that first half. Overall, really interesting kind of plays back and forth. They each had 4 conversions on third down. Each had 115 rushing yards. The only difference between these two was a 45-second time of possession. So what exactly went wrong for Mississippi State before we go ahead and dive into more with Florida? The explosive plays and the penalties. Mississippi State had 5 penalties in the first half that ultimately cost them multiple field position. Florida also capitalized on being able to get the explosive plays, whether it was to Shamir Dike, whether it was to a guy like Jaden Baugh out of the backfield, whether it was to Elisha Badger, Aiden Mizell, Hayden Hansen came up with a 35-yard grab for a touchdown. Ultimately, what occurred was you capitalized when you were Florida. And then the game kind of got out of control. And this is where we had the back and forth blowouts. This is where we had the moments of disaster. And ultimately, Florida gets a win, a very convincing win. Now, what does this mean for Billy Napier moving forward? People have already decided to write the script on Billy's story. And well, they should, because of, again, you lose to a Texas A&M squad with a first-year head coach and a backup quarterback. And even though the score will lie to you and say that this thing was interesting, it never was close. Never in the light did you feel like Texas A&M was going to give the game back to Florida. And as he left the field, it was very clear that he lost the fan base. But when you are Florida, you have to look at this from a 360-foot thousand level. And the problem is that Florida right now still has 8 more games to play. They're currently sitting at 2-2. So you can basically go ahead and call this a wash, but you still have moments that could end up being a big reason for this roster. I'm not sure if Billy Napier is going to survive past the month of October, and I certainly don't know if he will survive if they lose in 2 weeks at home against a UCF squad that still feels like it is growing into the Big 12. But you have to realize that after this moment, sitting at 2-2, there are players that are going to buy into the culture just a little bit longer. Realize that if you were to see players actually hit the red shirt button this year, they'd be able to miss some time. They would be able to go ahead and save a year of eligibility. And basically the season would be a wash to where what's going on down in Starkville right now would be happening in Gainesville. So Billy gets to save a week. The big question is, how do you keep this momentum moving forward? Explosive plays with the storyline from both DJ Lagway and Graham Mertz. Multiple passes of 20-plus yards downfield. 6 total plays of explosive offensive moments. You got to feel like this is a team that could at least make things interesting, especially when they go travel up to Knoxville in a couple of weeks. Whether you like this or not, and I know that there will be Tennessee fans that will say, Cole, why are you saying that this is going to be a close battle? It's not. I don't think so at all. But what I will tell you is the one kryptonite for whoever has been the head coach at Tennessee, Derek Dooley, Butch Jones. You go ahead and you look at potentially, you look at a Jeremy Pruitt, even Josh Heupel. 8-2 in the last 10 matchups between these two squads. Doesn't matter if it's at home or away. And by the way, in those 2 matchups between Tennessee and Florida, where Tennessee did get the dub, the final possession was less by 10 points. So overall, this could be a really interesting game moving forward. That being said, this also does feel like a relationship that has kind of reached its end. You know what this reminded me of? Whenever you see a couple that is destined to fail, they'll go on one last vacation. They'll go away from home. They'll try to go and solve the problems, and they'll say, "We had a good time. It was a great relationship. We see a future together." But ultimately, the writing is on the wall when they come back to reality. I tweeted out earlier, they're going to have the problems. The problems that existed when they departed will return. That's Florida. And if you don't believe me, well, let's just look at the numbers. Still horrendous in open field tackling. Mississippi State had 30 first downs compared to Florida's 28. 480 yards of offense allowed to a Bulldog team that was without Blake Shapen for the final 2 drives. 240 yards through the air. 7.1 yards per play. 6 total penalties. Still had a turnover. The problem still exists in Florida. The problem still underneath Billy Napier exists. You're delaying the inevitable, and there's a little bit of life that has come back, kind of like somebody on death's doorstep that is about ready to pass, but they gain a little bit of momentum. That's Florida right now. So you don't have to fire Billy Napier going into the bye week, and I don't think that they will. I think that they're going to hold out hope that what happens after the UCF game will give you a better indication about where this team looks. Ultimately, you do feel more confident, and give a lot of credit where credit's due to not just the folks down out in Gainesville. There was a good overall offensive consistency and an identity, but I think the main thing that you have to look at in this matchup is that now you have a direction on offense. Now you get to see what Florida truly looks like as an organization, taking that next step forward. Not saying that it's going to be promising forever, but what I am saying is that this is at least something that you can hold your hat on if you are Florida. Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway look the part. The offensive line, holding up defensive fronts, look the part. The run game, very potent, very promising, very demure, that some might even say. But this is still Florida. And ultimately, Florida still has multiple tests ahead, not just including Tennessee, but also you have Florida State at the end of the season. You got a road test against Texas. You got to go play LSU. You got to go take on Ole Miss. And the writing has been on the wall that Billy Napier is not the guy. But right now, because there is no school president, and the Board of Athletics would have to go ahead and take charge. More importantly, they would also have to go ahead and let Scott Strickland make more decisions. It may be best to hold on to Billy Napier for a little while longer. Not saying that it's ultimately a done deal, but naturally this is going to be the case. Let's talk about, of course, Mississippi State at this point. I was blasted by many Mississippi State folk, countless, if I can remember, in the offseason, telling me that this was going to be a different year. Jeff Lebby comes on in. You're going to see this team actually over-exceed expectations. This will be the wild card of all wild cards when it comes to the SEC. The writing's on the wall. It was going to be a down year. That does not mean that Mississippi State is going to be in trouble, but let's just look at their schedule to talk about what they can look forward to now that we don't know the status of Blake Shapen. Texas, Georgia, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri all still reside. By the way, of those teams I just listed off, 5 are currently in the top 10 of the AP poll. So I'm not saying that this is going to be a rocky rest of the year, and I'm not saying that you can't make things interesting. Go back and look at this game. There was some promising. You saw a ground game for the first time. Johnny Daniels found his way into the end zone. Davin Booth found his way into the end zone. 6.5 yards per attempt by Kevon Lee. There's enough to say that is the step in the right direction. But ultimately, this was going to be a rebuilding year. If you are a Mississippi State fan, what you're hoping for moving forward is that there is an identity. You can see the progress. You can see the potential. You can see the growth and the development of this squad underneath Jeff Lebby, that the offense is humming at the right time, and that maybe you're getting a few key stops on defense. But this is going to be a rebuilding year. This is going to be a year that takes a little bit of time off of you, and this is going to be where you have to establish yourself when it comes to setting a tone on the recruiting trail. If you do that, it's a little bit different. But the main difference between these two squads, more importantly, is that when you look at Billy Napier, when you look at this Florida team, still having undisciplined play, still allowing too many explosive passes downfield, still allowing a team like Mississippi State, which is the bottom dweller of all bottom dwellers in the SEC, to hang around. It's year 3. You don't look like a year 3 team. You look like a team that is very much similar to what Jeff Lebby has going on at Starkville. That's not going to be correctable. It can be when you talk about what's going on in Starkville for Mississippi State. Let's go ahead and read some comments. Mississippi State, straight up ass. Well, No, I won't go that far. You know what you were going to be this year. Let's talk about it. It was always a rebuilding season. You had question marks when it came to your secondary. You certainly had question marks when it came to your open field tackling. There was multiple issues when it came to the squad. So I'm not going to say that their ass. You knew it was a 1-year deal. That was the biggest problem. Levy doesn't know what to do when he loses his QB. Yeah, it's pretty fair. Right now, you don't have an established run game. You did see some steps in the right direction. Again, you saw as Johnny Daniels kind of took that next step. Davin Booth took that next step. Kevon Lee had a couple of good overall runs. But there still are some multiple question marks when it comes to this overall rushing attack. And I don't know if it's going to be correctable this year. I don't know when it will be correctable, but it certainly is not feeling like it's going in that direction right now. Gator Nation Stay Up by C. Mike. Yeah, at this point, you got to feel pretty good if you're Florida. You get to go into the bye week. You end not only a 7-game losing streak against P4 opponents, but you also find a way to get a win on the road. You were 2-12 going into this game in road matchups underneath Billy Napier. Now you're 3-12. Not saying that having a 25% success rate is good, but it goes into the bye week like you're carrying momentum. A couple more notes I want to hit real fast. Referees, what are we still doing? So you guys probably remember Aiden Mizell's touchdown, his second one, not the first one that was initially called down, but the one where he broke through multiple tackles. Mississippi State just looked like they were in a blender of chaos. And Montreal Johnson got flagged for what was called a blindside block. To which I say, Ray Charles, I didn't know that you were back from the dead and you decided to go ahead and make it down to Starkville, because that is one of the most egregious calls out there. If you are a referee of this game, you owe Aiden Mizell an apology, because you took away 6 points and you took away the momentum from a guy who had proven that he was doing a lot of good. And by the way, if you are in Gainesville right now, when Aiden Mizell touches back down in the swamp, you show him a good, safe, fun Saturday night, because of this man has earned the right to go ahead and have that success. What are we doing when it comes down to referee? Last week, we had the problem when it came to the South Carolina game where you had the pick six. Garrett Nussmeier makes a football play. Ultimately, Nicky Manwari runs it back for an easy 6 points. Momentum is going to Cola. And you go ahead and you say, no, the Zebras are going to decide this game. It wasn't the biggest deal. And ultimately, Florida still got a win. But why are we allowing those who are in charge of blowing the whistle to also blow if this game is going to go in favor of the home team or not? Can we let the players on the field actually decide this game? That's just my 2 cents of the situation. You got to see a step in the right direction. Now let's talk about, again, Florida. Can you carry this momentum going into next week? Because right now, it's one thing. You're getting on the plane. You get to keep it up. You get to keep an all-time high. You feel like this is a roster that at least is showing you some type of progress and potential. But how does this be sustainable going into an off period? You don't play next week. So naturally, you're not going to be at home. You're not going to be able to see what occurs next time that you go up against somebody. And you also get to go ahead and see where you are as a program as a whole. I think when you look at this Florida team right now, it's all about sustainability. Because again, a win here, it's a wash. You're currently 1-1 in conference play. You're 2-2 overall. Nobody's going to pay attention to currently what happened against Texas A&M or Miami if you find a way to get a win over Tennessee, especially a win in Neyland. Games against Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State to round out the year. We knew that the month of November was going to be basically a trip down Satan's alley. Everyone knew that, and everyone understood that. But how do you keep this momentum moving into next week against a UCF team that currently we don't know what they are? Yeah, they may be good for Big 12 play, but does that mean that you're good for conference play? Does that mean that you're good enough to be a college football playoff team? Big 12 is wide open. Nobody knows who's going to come away with the win in the Big 12 this year. So what do you do at this point? Graham Mertz seems to be the guy. You feel really confident if you have to turn to DJ Lagway. But ultimately, what is the course of action if you are Billy Napier and you are this offense? How do you keep the sustainability well past just a win in Starkville? How do you keep this momentum going against quality competition in the SEC? And is this enough for you if you do feel like you are a Florida fan, that you have enough to get to a bowl game? The bowl game is ultimately the end goal. I think that Billy's seat is already cooked. I think that when you lose the momentum of the entire locker room at times against Texas A&M, it becomes a bad deal. But you still have the ability to make this season interesting. Again, it's not lost. You still have an opportunity to be who you want for the rest of the year. But how do you get to that level? How do you get back to that type of sustainability? Couple more real fast. How bad does Texas beat State next week? It's going to be bad. Unfortunately, at this point, I think that you know who you are as a program if you're Mississippi State. It's not a sign in the right direction. It's not a sign that you feel comfortable if you are going to travel to Austin, especially if you don't have Blake Shapen. And he left the game early. He was dealing with an ankle injury, got the electrolytes back in him. Let's see what comes afterwards. Also, let's talk about what happens now if you are Blake Shapen. You feel good. We knew that this was going to be a passing attack that could at least be promising in Mississippi State. You saw the glimpses. Arizona State, a little bit last week against Toledo. Not saying it was a good game, but still feel good. Eastern Kentucky. If you don't have Blake Shapen, the offense is kind of dilute. You don't know what you're going to get moving forward. You certainly don't know what you're going to have in a young up-and-comer such as Michael Van Buren. 7-13, 100 yards. Did get a couple of big-time plays. Karikari down at the stretch to be able to at least make this down to the wire. Sure, that's enough. But what happens after this? Does he have the capabilities to march on in to Austin? Does he have the capabilities to hold his own against God knows how many other teams he had to face? Not just Ole Miss, but Texas A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri. What do? It just feels like, again, for if you are Mississippi State, you have a reality check of who you are as a program. Not saying this is an ultimate loss for the end of the day, but what I am saying is that you do know that there are problems, but it's a year one problem. Not saying that Mississippi State is going to eventually have all these problems moving forward when it comes to Jeff Lebby. You trust who he is as a person, but it's not going to be this year. Maybe you will hit the 4-win marker. Right now, it doesn't feel that way. Right now, in my opinion, it actually feels like you are just basically waving the white flag and hoping that 2025 turns the corner into a better direction. Make sure that you like, rate, review, subscribe. Follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Follow me on Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. I will be back after the Auburn-Arkansas game. We also may be doing live reactions depending on what happens between Vanderbilt and Missouri and Como. We're also going to be doing a live reaction tonight talking Tennessee and Oklahoma. So make sure that you hit subscribe. Make sure that you're following us on the social channels. Until next time, folks, I am Cole Thompson. Peace.